Okay, so welcome everyone to this month's version of the ReproNim webinar. We're super happy to have Pradeep Reddy Raamana with us today. Pradeep is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine in the Department of Radiology and affiliated with the Biomedical Informatics and the Intelligent Systems program there. His research interests are in medical image processing, machine learning, informatics, and open science, all of which are near and dear to the greater ReproNim community's heart. He's interested in developing multimodal biomarkers for various neurological and psychiatric disorders and characterizing the impact of fundamental methodological choices. Again, critically in the path of things that ReproNim and the ReproNim community are concerned about. I've been well aware of Pradeep's landmark spearheading of quality control efforts, and so are pleased to have him here today to talk about neuroimaging quality control, critically yet overlooked. So without further ado, Pradeep.
Thank you so much, David. So I guess I should mention I pursued this path partly on the shoulders of the giants like David, JB, etc. If I hadn't run into them and the community in my postdoc, thanks to my advisor, Stephen Schroeder, I don't think I would have actually stayed in academia or pursued any of this. So much credit to ReproNim people and the community around for spearheading reproducibilities and ideas of open science long before I ever came into it. So anyway, essentially the talk is gonna be, because we have somewhat of a manageable audience, I would like it to be informal, so please stop and ask questions. And I have all the time we need today, so can go through them in details, and I can send you the papers also. So quickly, for those who don't know me, actually there's not many in the audience today, but later who is watching the video, I'm at the University of Pittsburgh, like David mentioned, running the Open Minds Lab. Larger goal of our research program is to try produce better data via a number of ways, and most importantly, quality control, which can lead to us to produce better features based on domain expertise and designing them to be reliable and advanced techniques such as graph theory, which in turn helps us make better decisions with patients. This is what I understand to be a few important parts of the pipeline that really helps us get going, especially I'm much more of a clinical focused guy in the long term, but focusing a lot on methods and tools, right? And I try to close the loop. Yeah, I'm hoping to close the loop, but it's going to take some more time. That's the larger focus. For those interested in learning more about my work, take a look at my papers, right? So far I've done a lot of work on imaging biomarkers and like how to do machine learning right, especially if you're not an expert, both in machine learning or software engineering, and how to account for confounds properly, as well as improving the way we do quality assurance and quality control, just to give you a brief summary, right? And I'm of the opinion, I think standards and tools are as important or more important than methods. I remember, I think JB or somebody talking about this in 2015 or 16, unless you have a proper implementation given to the community in a fully code form, we don't have it, we haven't really achieved full sharing, So methods can exist in algorithmic forms, but they may not be implemented the same way by different people, and hence standards and tools are very important, So without going into all my research to explain why I'm here, roughly the way I see it, challenges in neuroimaging fit into these three boxes, Well, the fundamental, one of the very fundamental challenges is lack of quality, both in our input data we feed our analyses, as well as at intermediate stages. More importantly, methods and software that we use to analyze them haven't been sufficiently validated. It's improving now greatly, but nowhere near where it needs to be. And integrating them both is lack of sufficient open science. I know this community is very well familiar with open science, but this message hasn't reached all corners of our neuroimaging and neuroscience world. So more and more data and software is becoming open, but not enough to really answer all the questions. So we're trying to work on advancing the causes for all these challenges at the same time. So as I was preparing talks, I saw David's talk from January, and I like how he put the bullet points that everything matters and everything is a problem. And I think I agree. Essentially, wherever we look, I think we see a problem in the pipeline of analyses, you know. So from the perspective of QC and QA, I think everything matters. And I'll try to get that point across in a couple of slides also. So this talk is going to be mostly on quality control, but two parts of it. The first is essentially like why QC is essential, I guess, for simple reasons. Neuroimaging data is really, really complex, especially the more information it tries to provide you, the more complicated it is, which means the more combinatorial aspects of potentially going wrong, right? Hence, QC becomes essential. A lot of our understanding has improved quite a bit in the last 20, 30 years since fMRI and other modalities have come across, but there is still a lot of open questions in terms of when you try a QC and fMRI scan, for example, how do we what is there a standard way to do it? You know, should we do some pre-processing before we review the scan? Should we do detrending or slice timing correction? Or what level of motion is acceptable for your particular type of analysis? When you don't have to do it, you know, if you have a large enough data set and you're asking a simple question such as motor effects, do we need to do it at all? So these haven't been thoroughly answered yet. We are making progress. We see more and more papers on QC, but nowhere near to help us develop standards, right? So to help answer these questions, you know, we've made a special interest group back in 2018 and also met different forums, but this is one of those, what you call key moments in 2019, where people got together and we try to get to know different perspectives and how they come along, how would we go about what to do to advance this cause. And essentially, I think one thing we clearly learned is it's not easy by any means, and the scope is really, really large. That's a message we get quite often every time we talk about trying to solve this problem. For example, I ran a little survey to the OHBM and I think even MICAI community also to try define the scope as well as a narrow subset of questions slash issues to help people take up smaller problems as opposed to the biggest challenge in at one go. So what we realized is the challenge of quality control exists in multiple different, how do you say, subspaces, starting with the QC for facility, you know, the climate and hardware you maintain make a big difference, which we don't think, I mean, most people who are analyzing the data don't think about this, but it matters, as well as calibrating the scanner, making sure they're performing the daily QA in terms of phantom corrections and whatnot, and followed by the specific session where you get the actual MRI data for the patient, you know, both at the beginning of the session, for example, to make sure scanner is in a known state appropriate for the patient and the goals of that particular imaging session, followed by post-session QC in terms of checking for artifacts and understanding the level of issues in the data before you go ahead and analyze. And then the beyond the image issues in terms of multi-site and multi-scanner harmonization issues. They've gotten a lot of attention in the last 5 years. I think we do have some good methods and tools to deal with it, but not really fully solving the problem. And in this phase, some of the issues are QA. They just need to follow the process properly, and some of the issues are more QC. I'll explain the difference quickly. This tends to be missed also. So the two things I'm going to talk about is one is on actually entirely QA, one is entirely QC. So the difference quickly being, let's say if this is the typical process pipeline you have for your analyses, QA is about making sure you're following the process properly. It's all process oriented, right? Whereas QC is about the final product, very product oriented, like is the final output free from defects, like the cortical thickness features produced by FreeSurfer, regardless of what happened before, are they anatomically accurate or not, is what I think of QC as. Whereas QA is, did you do the right things to produce the data? So yeah, I think we actually ran a course in OHBM in 2019, and the link below, and you can go there to learn much more about various modalities and informatics tools, etc. So while preparing, I also wanted to find a funny way to introduce the topic, and I asked ChatGPT to describe the issues that can occur. And amazingly enough, it actually summarized them somewhat well. I don't know what you guys think of the summary here, but I think for a newbie, this is good enough introduction to think about the scope of issues that can happen, And as I was playing with it, I tried to ask some funny questions here. Say, hey, what are the original things? And like I tried to tell you before, pooled quality control, small sample sizes, overfitting, circular analysis, like a standard publication bias, etc. Like they ChatGPT knows about ReproNim, David Kennedy too. So, and it can actually produce some funny jokes in terms of. I like this one particularly, Anyway, yeah, it is indeed wow, David. It's amazing. Yeah, so and because it's the ReproNim community, I like this one too about reproducibility. Because they thought replication was only for DNA, connecting two different fields. It's pretty funny. Yeah, and it can also tell you a plan for how to improve neuroimaging research, standards, QC, QA, sharing collaboration, I totally agree. Yeah, so anyway, that's I try to give that orientation just so they understand where in this big space of neuroimaging quality control, the two things I wanted to talk about fit. So I push hard for ground truths and QC standards, whereas I think much of the community has a big demand for automatic tools, and for good reasons. I think one of the biggest reason is people just don't have the resources to spend sufficient time to actually do it properly, and no one is to blame for that. It's just unfortunately the reality. We don't have enough funding or people or qualified personnel to take care of it. So there is definitely big demand for automatic tools, but I don't think that means we need to compromise on the quality and robustness of the standards and tools just because we don't have the resources. So I take the slower approach of going more manual, more visual and assistive tools as opposed to fully automatic tools. Sometimes it's possible to get there, but I think we need to take a slower approach. So the first project is one of those where before we go ahead build an automatic tool to detect issues with FreeSurfer outputs, I wanted to build a visual protocol to produce reliable ground truth data. That way, once we have reliable ground truth data for sufficiently large data sets, we can then go on this data mining exercise to find one of those wonderful machine learning techniques to detect issues accurately and in a generalizable fashion. Any questions so far? Okay. Yeah, this is all very familiar, I think. Yeah. So quickly, this is what a good segmentation for FreeSurfer looks like for those who haven't done any FreeSurfer. And this is what one of those very bad segmentations look like, you know? So just to give you a sense of the type of errors that FreeSurfer does, although it's a fantastic tool, you know, they have improved it quite a bit in the last 20 years or so. It used to be much worse, but continuous deployment, better data, and better methods actually improved, but still it does overestimate in some areas. For example, what we call the PL overestimate, well understood error by FreeSurfer in about 30% of the scans. And there is some underestimation in temporal poles. This is based on frequencies we computed from 2 Canadian data sets. So these are also somewhat common errors in Banks STS as well as pericalcarine. And traditional workflow, at least the one I learned when I started my PhD, is a nightmare. Basically, what people would have told you 15 years ago is to open up the TKM editor for viewers and go through slice by slice and just look around to make sure these white and yellow contours, which are basically the surfaces of white and gray matter, follow the anatomy correctly or not. And that would take, I don't know, an hour or two of full attention for each subject if you want to do it properly. And if it's only for 20, 30, 50 subjects, we can probably do it. But for the current data sets with thousands of scans, it's just impossible. And even if you were to do it, you are not paying attention because it's just very labor consuming, right? Traditional workflow basically is a nightmare. And some people improved upon them. For example, the Enigma, good folks at the Enigma developed assistive tools to produce HTML pages and visualizations of the parcellation to make that process a little bit easy. But to get through large number of subjects, they made some choices to present only limited views and in a way that's actually not entire that does not lead to accurate judgments because it's opaque overlays and whatnot, right? So, like I was saying, limited views, opaque overlays, and inflexible ratings because they were trying in order to get through a large number of subjects, they are trying to keep the options limited. You know, this is not wrong, but it's not as best a source of reliable rating, especially if you want to develop predictive models to detect issues in an automatic fashion, right? So, but also the tool was not too extensible or user friendly. So to solve that issue, I developed a Python library, keeping in mind various other parts of the workflow that's very important for typical neuroimaging QC workflows. And some of these parts are here, allowing for pre-processing, detecting outliers, and a customized interface for in-depth review and comprehensive rating and notes and easy navigation to the data set. I think this is up. You can easily fit that workflow to most of the QC tasks for neuroimaging. And the interface of FreeSurfer QC looks like this. Because of its heavy customization for FreeSurfer, you can get through hundreds of FreeSurfer outputs pretty quickly in like even in I think I don't want to, I know, maybe like in a couple of minutes at the max for a subject. Once you refine it further, focusing on most frequent errors, I think you can even get through them like, I don't know, 10, 20 seconds per subject. So it can be really fast. So we've extensively validated this tool/protocol. And the larger goal was to enable the community adopt it. so we can start producing more and more ground truth for automatic model development, right? So this paper is published in Aperture. We validated in 2 big Canadian datasets, Canvine and Andre, for 2 different versions of ReproNim. Just gonna go through quickly to give you a sense of the results. We can discuss them in detail later if you want to. The visualization here shows what we call error detection rate. It's simply the frequency of errors we notice within a given data set. You know, the top panel here is for the Enigma QC protocol, and the pairs of left and right brains for each rater, as you can see by the tags. And we also show that for visual QC, right? This is to show that even when you pick, you can see that, like, for example, the medial temporal lobe and parahippocampal gyrus, the errors are quite frequent. This is very well known. And even there is variability either within the same rater or across raters, or within the same rater across protocols, you know? So basically, the big point is these ratings are really subjective. Depending on who is doing it or their mood on that particular day, this can change quite a bit, which is why for visual QC protocols, inter-rater reliability is very important, right? Which is what we set out to quantify and show that for this particular tool, it's reduced. I don't know if we can completely eliminate it, but it's much reduced compared to Enigma QC, for example, right? This is to make a comparison between visual QC and Enigma QC much more direct. In the different maps here, you see negative value indicates that, you know, in QC detected a greater percentage error, which we would term it as higher false positive rate. It's somewhat of a biased assumption here because I think we kind of assume that ratings with our tool are more correct in a sense because it exposes the rater to much more information, allows them to zoom in and rate it much more accurately, quickly. So these are the difference maps between the 2 protocols. I don't know if it would help going too much in detail. More important, in my opinion, is what we call inter-rater reliability based on these ratings, which are much more granular compared to the Enigma QC protocol. And across all combinations of datasets and ReproNim versions, our reliability is much higher compared to Enigma QC for a number of reasons that I mentioned, right? So this, we believe, is helpful and important, and hence those looking to do good QC for their future output, I encourage them to use our tool. And I'm highly biased, of course, because I developed it. And we also, in the paper, presents a lot of statistics on site differences, you know, for different data sets and different ReproNim versions. This is also well known, so to say. So that's the first part, focusing on visual QC protocol. Any questions so far? Okay. So the second part is the QA, like I was mentioning. As you know, QA is all about process. This is actually like ideas for this project were developed entirely at Pitt, actually. I didn't realize this was a problem until I was sitting in the middle of a big imaging center. As you all know here very well, neuroimaging acquisition is really complex, with hundreds of parameters. Technologies make a lot of changes on the fly on the day of the imaging session. Some I think they play around with the SAR and few other parameters often to optimize it for the patient. And if they make mistakes, or if scanner software has bugs, it can actually get easily propagated without us ever realizing that it's a problem, right? Some of these issues can be easily repaired, if it's just a differences in voxel resolution, we can resample the data, but some are basically fundamental issues with physics in terms of phase encoding direction, etc., right? So it would be ideal to prevent these issues as much as possible, so we don't have to actually like try to fix them later, right? So essentially, like just to give you a better understanding of exactly what I'm talking about. So the left half shows you what we call protocol here. I think that's the same word used in other imaging centers too. So oftentimes when they set up the session for a patient, the technologists take some of these parameters from, say, the step 2 here, TWFR, and paste them into the next step. What do you see as resting state here, right? And it should propagate some of the important things such as the field of view and the other parameters they set up, such as the phase encoding direction. I don't know if you noticed the PED for TDW was right to left, but for resting state it became A to P instead of getting the previous value propagated. This it was discovered because one of the projects ran into an issue and we didn't have an easy way to fix it because it's a bug in the Siemens software, and I think they're aware. I don't know if they will be, if they care enough to fix this actually. So to try, the best way to solve it would be a real-time monitoring system. As soon as they hit acquire, if we had a parallel QC system monitoring what's being acquired, it can actually kind of enforce compliance. Say, hey, the parameters you issued are different from what we expect, so please correct right away, and they can actually like alert the MR technologies, etc. Right? So this, unfortunately, is not possible for a number of reasons, including lack of access to the scanner, internal software, etc. Right? So what we tried to do was to do a more manual practical solution, right? So we cannot obviously go on check the entire protocol before being acquired, because as some of you know well, these are like very there is like hundreds of parameters for each protocol, right? So like just to give you an example here, right? So we can't look at them all, and oftentimes errors don't happen in all sections, they happen only in few places, right? So what we do was to take a complex protocol on the left and boil it down to few critical parameters where we would rather have no errors at all, and encourage the RAs or PIs who will be doing the acquisition to look at these just before they hit acquire on the scanner, So this helps avoid major issues, right? You don't want to wake up in a year and say, hey, PED was wrong for like 30% of the scans, because that's invaluable. That's a painful amount of loss of data, right? This is more work, more pain for sure, but definitely worth it in the long run. It only takes a minute or two during the acquisition, but can help improve the quality, integrity of the data quite a bit, right? So when people can add more checks in terms of looking for artifacts, also just when after they acquire, and can be customized depending on what they care about, what the project's goals are, etc. And it's actually being used by some of the users in our center here, so we're happy about it. But it is, like I said, hard and sometimes impossible, especially to harmonize across multiple sites and sequences, etc. And there is a lot of data that's already been acquired too. And as software gets upgraded, etc., these manual checklists will not make it easy to check for compliance, right? So to help, and just to reinforce the point further, why do we need to make sure the parameters are the same? I mean, other than the basic scientific principle that we cannot compare them, when they were not measured the same way, some of these sequences are pretty sensitive to some parameters. For example, T1, T2 with echo time, or EPI without non-compliant field map, right? Or DTI with different PDs results in different FA, etc. Right? This is shown. I think we can do more research here going forward to make the point further. So to complement that manual checklist, we developed a tool called MRQA, and what it does to take the data from XNAT or whatever your imaging center source is, and we also created a data structure called MR dataset to help us easily interface with different types of dataset formats, and then checks for compliance / consistency in different axes, so to say, right? I'll explain that in a minute. And then produce a quick report that makes it easy for people to see where there is compliance, where there is not, which parameters were deviating from the predefined protocol, which were not, etc. Right? And this can help us go through, like, I think for ABCD, even with like 11,000 scans, I think we could get it done by a few hours. And like, because this is going to be done in a background daily, it probably takes less than 10 minutes, depending on how much was acquired for there. So it's a very good tool to have when you are acquiring data for multi-site large projects, right? So essentially what the tool does is to think of these as these different subjects belonging to the data set. We so far implemented what we call horizontal audit. It checks for like whether the TR value matches for fMRI across all subjects and sessions, right? There is more relationships that are encoded into a protocol into what we call vertical audit that we're not checking yet. But even checking that one parameter value matches for the same modality across all subjects in a data set goes a long way, and that's not being done. That's the main message of this part of the talk, right? So the title, when I say critical and overlooked, this is what being referred to by that overlooked part, right? So this tool takes a data set and produces a report that looks something like this. This is a dummy, simple report, right? You can see, for example, here, for a DTI modality here, there were total 5 subjects, but 1 subject was acquired with a different PED than the other 4, right? And this is all completely automatic, right? What we do is to essentially infer the reference protocol from the data set based on how the frequency of the values. If 4 subjects had a PED left to right, we assume that's the reference and flag the other subject as not deviating. You can, of course, insert a reference protocol yourself, not today, but very soon, and then we'll just check against that supplied reference, so to say, right? But I think inferring makes it easier because not a lot of users have the ability to figure out what the reference protocol is, and because they're stored in funny formats and only physicists can understand sometimes, right? Anyway, so to demonstrate that this issue is actually prevalent, not just something that we are imagining, we've analyzed a large number of data sets on OpenNeuro as well as the ABCD, much thanks to them being open, and we'll show that frequent sources of non-compliance for protocols are these parameters here, There is others too, but most often these are the sources. Does it make sense so far? Okay, it's not that complicated, so. Yeah, so this is a summary of the results from our analyses on OpenNeuro datasets. So the table, each row is a dataset here, and you can see the columns are pretty self-explanatory. Functional fMRI here for the first row, vendor Siemens, number of echo times 3. This is a funny way to say that it's a multi-echo modality, actually. And the next is number of non-compliant subject and a percentage of the total number of subjects there. The sources of non-compliance, we call parameters here, TR and PB, and number of compliant subjects, etc. Right? So this is followed by a big long HTML where it goes into more details about each of these modalities. So the PI/RA can dig into where exactly which file is a problem so they can fix it, right? Just to highlight some interesting patterns here for this dataset 4169, you can see that it's actually remarkably compliant in terms of very low number of non-compliant subjects, 213, despite being large in terms of over 1200, right? It's coming mostly from Siemens scanners. I forget the title of or the country/university. Compare that to, for example, here with Philips scanner, DS202, you can see is much more non-compliance. Most often the reason being the TR value differing for 28 subjects out of 95, right? So the idea, like our motivation here is to demonstrate the prevalence. I think for the users, when they do it, like any non-compliance, it needs to be looked at, right? That's the overall goal.
Can I jump in with a question here?
Yeah.
This is great. And in retrospect, it's really cool to know these things. You said the words a second ago, when you find these non-compliance, you could say something about fixing it. Now, to some extent, in retrospect, we can't fix, presumably, the TR in some data set within Open Neuro. Had we been doing this prospectively in our lab the day of, or during the run, yes, then maybe we could fix it if something went wrong at that point in time. So I was just curious, if I used DS000202 that has those issues that you circled there, what's a poor user, to do? Yes, okay, now I'm aware of it. That's good. Should I just use the compliant bit? Should I compare and contrast the compliant versus non-compliant to see if that matters? I don't know. What do you recommend now that I'm aware of the issues that you're identifying here?
Right. So if the thing is, I think from what I understand, some issues are fixable. Like if, for example, think of the simple one being resolution, using a different resolution. We can simply resample the other part and then go ahead and analyze them, right? Our TR, I don't know actually if I can just fix them, to be honest. So maybe if there is any MR physicists in the crowd, they can say that. I would tend to go with awareness is the biggest advancement here. And second, just discard or analyze the compliance subset separately, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was leaning to. And again, it's great to have this to know. So again, I love it, but I'm just thinking what the downstream effects of that are. Thank you.
Yeah, answering that question would be very nice research, actually. We hope to do that, So, of course, in fact, one can even say, does that even matter in my results? I don't know, actually. Yeah.
That was kind of underlying sort of my question is if you, I don't know, pick something that has a good bit of uncompliance, 29% versus 70%, and do a between the compliant and non-compliant group and see if you're finding any statistical differences, or look at whatever your outcome is in the full group versus the compliant group and see if anything changes as a function of that. Would be hugely fascinating to know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely, think the ABCD dataset would give us many more opportunities like that.
Do you have a sense of, I'm sorry to keep interrupting here, but do you have a sense of how much of ABCD is non-compliant? To some extent, they feel like they do a pretty good prospective job, but okay.
Well, wait one slide, you will see that.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So this is still another of those open questions that I mentioned in the beginning, right? My biggest discovery in the last few years since joining Pitt is that this is a very overlooked issue, So when I talk to people at OHPM last year, and I talked to a lot of directors of the imaging centers, they're actually familiar with that issue. It's just that nobody cared to like really fix it at the community level, like not I take it back. I don't want to say it in a negative way. They didn't have the resources, or they just like they try to what do you call throw data that were not acquired and just forget about it, so to say. And what I'm trying to do here is to get people to think about it. This is an issue. Always double check that the data set you're going to analyze. Essentially, where I come from is that if we cannot analyze a group of measurements that were not measured in the same way, right? That we all agree, right? And I think when people download the data set from OpenNeuro, they assume everything is good because it's been gone through QC and whatnot and actually shared, right? They don't think any further than that. And I think that's where I I think I haven't reached out to Russ yet, but I talked to Franco, and maybe even like I was going to mention this to David and NITRC folks too. When somebody shares the data set through various portals, including CBrain, we can run these checks before we make it available to users. I think that also helps. And we need to also let the users think about, hey, check this before you go analyze kind of thing. That's my approach to making people aware of it. I think that's going to be an advancement in itself, and people will figure out what to do in the future. I think I don't know the answer, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, I'll mention a few more things that will make this discussion more interesting in a bit. So this is on OpenNeuro so far. Oh, important thing is this is all coming from BIDS format, as you know, and we rely a lot on the JSON sidecar because Nifty doesn't encode all the important MR physics parameters, for good or bad. I think some of you are probably originally involved in the Nifty format development back in the day, so you might have interesting reasons why they did do that. But yeah, so this is the OpenNeuro, and this is the ABCD, as David was asking. We didn't do all of ABCD because it's like a massive data set. It's actually like we needed 10 terabytes of data even to handle this, and it was a big effort, and much thanks to Harsh Sinha in the audience, who did the most of the hard work to plow through the data on multiple iterations. So here, as you can see, I think it was not clear before. Here we present the results stratified by vendor. I'll explain the reason because they have a very interesting way to organize data. Oh, this is weird. I wanted to highlight some stuff. Sorry, one second. My animations are not working as I intended. Image. No, don't remove it. So yeah, so for example here, for T1 modality, for Siemens has actually pretty good compliance for whatever reason. I think it could also be something to do with site variability. Some technologies are better than others. Whereas for GE and Philips, it's much higher. Like we're talking about 400 subjects and stuff, right? So the deviating parameters are echo time, flip angle, and various other things. Shimming is often a problem too, sometimes, right? So another thing to highlight is between the same scanner or same type of scanner, Philips, for T1 and T2, it's different levels of non-compliance, right? And for field maps, PED becomes much more important, right? So the ABCD shares a number of other things too, but because of our disk space limitations, in a funny way, we're trying to figure that out. We've only focused on these three. We hope to run it on everything else soon. But this is just to get the discussion started and making sure we are analyzing the data right. Like David said, the ABCD has a very good QC team, but I think they may have looked at compliance in a different way, and we are going through in a much more, what's the word, indiscriminate, data-driven way. And we actually haven't looked at all the protocol parameters. We only looked at a few, in fact. When we increase our scope, I think we might discover a bit more too. Yeah, so this is the results on ABCD. Any questions, David or others? Do you see anything that we missed here?
No, it's just fascinating to see that. And I, again, not to belabor too long, but when you say there's TE differences, say in the T1 on GE, I mean, is that TE from at some decimal point of 35.1 versus 35.01, or is it?
Yeah.
So seeing the ranges on some of those variables would be interesting, just as an
Oh,
additional.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna mention that. So it is true that some of the stats leading to non-compliance are based on minor changes. We do round everything down to 2 decimal points. And today we are putting in a constraint of exact numerical equality because I think that's what people have in mind. And also because there are no references for acceptable ranges for different parameters, right? So this is back to the question of, I think there was some study on flip angle varying from 80 degrees to 75 to 90 or 120. I think flip angle variation is not that a big of an issue, but I think TR and other things could be. So we don't know the answer. The way I would approach in a tool like this is to be more conservative and then let the user decide if that is a problem or not. So we are imposing numerical equality, exact equality as a way to check for compliance. I think our tool would offer ways to relax that, and depending on the project and goals and whatnot, right? So I think we visualized some distributions in the paper, but I don't think we visualized the TR. Harsh, do you remember? I will try to bring up the paper in the meanwhile.
Yeah, some of the subjects do have a lot of variations, like 3.1 to 1.4, but there are also minor issues like 2.9 to 3.2. So major differences from 1.4 to 3.1 is rare, and like only for a very small set of subjects. But for most of the subjects which have range, like there are different ranges for different modalities, and it is varying for different even for different vendors. So it's kind of a subjective problem, and I would agree with Dr. Pradeep that like the user has to get into the issue and to see whether it conforms with their protocol or not.
Yeah, so this is the draft preprint we are working on right now. Gives you a distribution of what is this parameter here? TR.
Yeah.
For API, and like we show 5 data sets here, and I think is this helping, David?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the disclosing of how bad, say, that func changing from 3.5 to 2 to 1 is possibly more dramatic than someone else going from 3.0 to 3.1 to 2.9 or something. So again, so being able to identify the differences and also show the magnitude of that is just helpful in how people would react to that. But ultimately, again, it's in the user's hands or in the community's hands to decide how much this variance, how much trouble it's causing, and understand how this source of variance is.
Yeah, exactly.
Important.
So this is
So
this is TR. This
so no,
is
it's just great to have it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thank you. This is TE here, but bigger point is you see there's a distribution has big variance, So the funny part is I was just going to mention that after ABCD here, you can still see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. So some of the data sets, they were uploaded combining different magnetic field strengths, for example, 3 Tesla versus 1.5, because we realized when we noticed there was like, I don't know, 90% of non-compliance, when we dug into it, we realized, the frequent sources was magnetic field strength, and oftentimes people may not even realize it when they go about analyzing it. This is the point I was trying to make, because some of the users, what one might call research parasites, in a positive way. They just download the data and then go through all sorts of libraries without ever thinking about how they were acquired, right? And like sometimes you have to stratify them for age groups, even though they're all clubbed and shared in the same way in the portal. And the constraints on what is called compliant actually is complicated by the fact that cross-vendor definitions are different. For example, Siemens uses a TR in the range of 2000 to 4000 milliseconds, whereas Philips does in differently, 6 to 7.5, and there is internal conversions for them. So if you were to just look at only what you can read in the DICOM header, and you try to combine, then you would have like, oh my God, one is 6, another is 2000. That's wrong, right? So we learned all of this through trial and error as we go through a lot of data sets. And it's just been a big pain to deal with, to be honest, because DICOMs are already painful. Like this is what I was trying to say here. You look at the TR for T1 in Philips, which is 6.31, compared to TR for T1 in Siemens, which is 2500, etc. Some physicists don't see that as a problem because this is what they're used to. They don't question. So yeah, JB, I'll get to you in 1 second. I see your question. So yeah, and limitations for our results I presented in those 2 tables are, like I mentioned before, the results are so far entirely horizontal. So we are only checking whether TR is the same across the subjects. We are not checking for relations between, let's say, T1 and fMRI within the same session. Those are also important. For example, the field map for an API scan has to have same type of shimming and PED, etc. That we are not checking. I think that would reveal a lot more issues, I believe, but we are testing. What we have is keeping us busy in terms of testing and whatnot. We'll try to get into those vertical audit checks very soon. And not every single parameter was included for development and lack of time reasons. We'll do that soon. And we talked about the exact equality already. And more importantly, DICOMs are a massive pain to deal with. And we will take all the help we can get from this community to make it easy. So yeah, all the software is here, and we're very open to collaboration. And I also ran another webinar series focused on a lot of topics closely relevant to quality control. You can go check it out here. Yeah, so the software is here. For JB asked a question. What are the raters blind for the QA protocol? Could ReproNim standard help for QA? So what do you mean by blind? You mean like?
I was just curious if they knew which tool they were using before.
Oh yeah, they definitely knew because it's obvious in the interface, So how does that matter?
They might have some priors, or so it's a little bit of a difficult aspect there. But yeah, well, probably not. But it's you can't.
So yeah, there is definitely bias. Like the whole analysis we did, we kind of assumed that ratings from Visual QC are some more accurate than Enigma QC. because one, Enigma does not expose important views of the parcellation to detect them, you know? And sometimes the way it exposes, because of the opaque overlay and whatnot, it's difficult to actually check for anatomical accuracy because most of the issues are only within few vertices, and it just like washes them out with like thick red paint, so to say, you know. So we kind of like, our hypothesis is that it does lead to more false positives and less true positives because of the design itself. So yeah, but like the iterator reliability is, I think, is more of a better pitch in my opinion, because that is very important to develop ground truth as opposed to the accuracy of the amount of errors they can find, in my opinion, and the amount of errors one can find in a translation is directly proportional to how much time they spend on it, because in my opinion, almost all free surface parcellations are wrong, because we're talking about 300,000 vertices, and as you go through 300 slices in different angles, you'll find something. The question is all about what level of parcellation accuracy is acceptable or not, and how quickly can we get it done for the goals we have in mind, you know? So that's how I personally approach it. Now, I did give a talk to Doug Reeve and Bruce Fischel at MGH, you know. Doug was kind of pushing me back on like, hey, does this even matter at the large scale, you know? Show me that it matters before you ask me to do all these visual stuff in a manual way, because it's too much work, you know? So that needs to be done, and I hope to demonstrate that soon. And the second question is the ReproNim standard. What do you mean by that, JB? I'm actually not familiar.
It's just things that I think mostly Yarrick has developed with others to standardize the input on the scanner console.
Yeah.
So you have a specific specification of on how to
right,
things
yeah,
in the scanner. So we put that, because I thought those cards were kind of a constant in some ways, like so
yeah.
I'm a bit surprised by the variation of those measures, of those parameters. But
yeah, actually, I've been in touch with Yarrick quite regularly, as you know, and he's actually using it already at Dartmouth. You know, he's familiar with the results, and so the standard. You mean the tool he developed? Is there like what?
See, Pradeep, I use your products. You need
Oh,
to use
hey,
my
you are
products,
in.
and
I
then
didn't know you
we'll
were
be
in
friends.
audience. Yeah, go ahead. What do you mean by standard, Yarrick? Tell me more.
Well, it's just to automate conversion to bits, right? So we developed this ReproNim convention, which is pretty much name your sequences like bits in a scanner, and then for any study you should do, you can automatically convert them into bits. So whenever I used your tool, I used it not on original DICOMs, I used it already on converted to bits datasets, which were converted from ReproNim convention kind of, named datasets.
Okay.
And that's for maybe some addition, I don't know. To answer JB, I don't see where we could kind of help much with ReproNim, besides that we are facilitating to conversion to unified bits layout, right? So after it's converted, then people could use Pradeep's tool.
Well,
no, I understand. I was thinking that that maybe having a way of importing like a fixed set of parameters for a sequence, I think is usually the thing that people do in their study card or whatever they're called.
Yeah, if someone marry, right, ReproNim and some study specification tool, right? So whenever they design the study, this is the sequences which we'll do, and this is the number of volumes we expect to collect, right? And then somehow it will create this specification, which then actually not Pradeep's tool, but what is the other one? I introduced Pradeep and other people recently.
Yeah, MR Verify from Randy Buckner's lab.
Here we go. Right. So they have similar tool where they create the kind of the protocol, like, oh, this is what we'll be doing now. Let's check all the sequences against that protocol, right?
Yeah.
Which is a little bit different from what Pradeep does, right? Pradeep doesn't need that. Pradeep's tool, right? Were Pradeep and Harsh's, right?
Yes,
or,
exactly.
or given the data, what are inconsistencies, right?
Yeah.
So there is no
I agree.
comparison to the
It's a
target.
retrospective versus prospective things. I do have to run. Pradeep, it was super.
Yeah.
It was super
Yeah,
nice to
thanks.
see you, and thanks a lot for the talk.
So
Awesome.
I can answer that quickly now, actually. The answer is run this before you run ReproIn. That's my answer. And also integrate it into CBrain when they share the data. I think that helps everybody, right? That would be the way to go. Bye, JB.
Take care.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind to share. Happy to spend more time on any of the aspects.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Pradeep. I'm going to insert into for the folks here, we can talk more in just a moment, but just a reminder that today's March 3rd. So Friday, April 7th, we'll have Sukli Liu from USC talking about reproducibility education applied to the rehabilitation research community. So it's an offshoot of ReproNim's educational materials to a rehabilitation research community. So stay tuned and join us for that one as well. Okay, so back to any. Yep, sorry.
No, she's amazing. I encourage people to listen to her.
Yeah. So back to any pending questions here for you, Pradeep.
Just quick question. Sorry, I've missed most of the talk or all of it.
It's okay.
What about the field maps? Do you remember, like, we had not field maps, but APPA kind of conversion field maps, right? That there was this issue when I've tried on our data.
You mean how we need to infer the field map PD for a field map properly because BIDS encodes it in a tag called intended for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, it is still. So this is actually an issue for what we call MR dataset. This still basically this is our gateway to BIDS and DICOM and everything else, right? So
I'm not yet to try, right? So it's yet to be fixed, and then I'll try again.
Yeah. So we're discovering like a new issue every week, to be honest. So we have so much to fix, and I think this is all work from less than a year, actually. Like thanks to phenomenal hard work from Harsh and me too, actually. But there's so much more to do. Like I was saying, DICOMs are a pain, and that pain would not go away anytime soon, in my opinion. And this is actually also where we need community help, especially the ReproIn community's help, because right now we're handling mostly Siemens data. I think we can extract parse the private headers for Siemens, but we haven't at all tested stuff for GE and Philips, etc. So I think community's adoption and help is going to be critical for this to be like much more. It is widely available and usable, but to make it much more, what you call, to make it handle these million edge cases that we have in, I don't know, sequences and scanners on the scale of, let's say, ABCD or UK Biobank, I think we would need a lot more community input. I think basically it needs to go through that exercises BIDS went through before they did the spec. This is like maybe in the year one of that effort, right? So the MRQA part itself is rather easy, although there we need to develop standards like I was mentioning, defining the acceptable ranges for different parameters, establishing cross-vendor correspondence for different parameters, units and stuff. But like parsing the data properly itself is actually a big task. And also I think I'm planning to run a survey to crowdsource various constraints people expect to be applying on their protocols, like especially the vertical audit constraints in terms of the relationships different imaging centers encode between sequences of the same protocol. I think that needs to be crowdsourced. We plan to do that, and then offer classes / API in such a way so they can customize it for themselves and implement it. So larger goal. So the way I think this would solve and advance the community is take this, users can take this and install it on as a cron job every night and whenever they prefer, that keeps monitoring whatever gets acquired in those centers and emails people or keeps a dashboard or whatever to make sure people are aware of the issues as soon as possible. Even longer term, we hope to have vendor neutral open source imaging software that actually checks for compliance real time, like every minute or every second. That way we completely eliminate the issue altogether. But I think that's more of a pipe dream right now. The current solution is acquire data, make sure it's good, and do it as soon as possible so you can actually minimize the amount of data you lose. So that's my pitch.
Okay, so if there's any burning issues, we can ask that. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Pradeep again, and we know where you are and you know where we are. And so I encourage us to keep up the dialogue. And again, I appreciated your series, and I know Yarek and a number of us tried to participate and view a lot of those, and that's a very valuable set of resources. So thank you for doing that, both with your own materials and the community materials.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm much inspired by you guys. So.
Well, great. Thank you again. And